I was yanking the starting cord on my snowmobile for the third time when I heard the sharp click of heels on frozen pavement behind me. It was 6 in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the mountains surrounding Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I had exactly 15 minutes to get to the search and rescue station before my shift started. The machine roared to life just as a shrill voice cut through the crisp winter air. Excuse me, sir." I turned to see a woman in her mid-40s marching across the parking lot of our townhome complex, her blonde bob bouncing with each aggressive step. She wore a puffy pink jacket and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. I had seen her around the neighborhood but never had the misfortune of actually speaking with her. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping one hand on the snowmobile's handlebar. The engine purred beneath me, warm and ready. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Mountain View Estates HOA," she announced, stopping about 3 feet from me. Her breath came out in angry little clouds. "And I need to discuss your vehicle situation." I glanced at my watch. 12 minutes now. I'm actually on my way to work right now. "Can this wait until later?" "No, it cannot." She held up her clipboard, tapping it with a manicured fingernail. "I've received multiple complaints about your snowmobile. You've been operating it at unreasonable hours, storing it improperly, and monopolizing community resources." Community resources? I almost laughed. "This is my personal snowmobile. I bought it with my own money." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "That may be, but you live in a community now, and the HOA has rules about recreational vehicles. According to Section 12, subsection 4 of our bylaws, all recreational equipment must be available for community use during designated hours." Now I did laugh. "That's insane. This isn't recreational equipment. I use this for my job." "Your job?" She looked skeptical. "What kind of job requires a snowmobile at 6 in the morning? I'm a search and rescue coordinator for Routt County. I need this machine to reach emergency sites in the backcountry. People's lives depend on it." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure the county can provide you with equipment. There's no reason you need to use your personal vehicle when our community members could benefit from it. In fact, I've already drawn up a usage schedule. You'll have access on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The other residents will rotate the remaining days." I stared at her, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank. "You want me to share my snowmobile with the neighbors? That's what community living is all about, Mr. Porter." She flipped through her clipboard and produced a sheet of paper. "Now, if you'll just sign this agreement, we can resolve this matter quickly." "I'm not signing anything," I said, revving the engine slightly. "And I'm late for work. We'll talk about this later." I started to ease the snowmobile forward, but Patricia stepped directly in front of me, holding up her hand like a traffic cop. "This conversation is not over. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to file a formal complaint with the HOA board. We have the authority to impose fines up to $500 per day for violations." My radio crackled to life on my belt. "Porter, you copy. We've got a situation developing near Rabbit Ears Pass. Skier reported overdue." I grabbed the radio. "Copy that. I'm 10 minutes out." Patricia's face turned red. "Are you seriously ignoring me right now?" "There's someone missing on the mountain," I said, maneuvering the snowmobile around her. "So yes, I'm ignoring you. We'll discuss your insane demands when I get back." I didn't wait for her response. The snowmobile shot forward, kicking up a spray of snow as I headed out of the parking lot toward the main road. Through my mirrors, I could see Patricia standing there, her mouth moving in what I assumed were very unpleasant words. The missing skier turned out to be a 23-year-old from Texas who had ventured off trail and gotten himself wedged in a tree well. We found him hypothermic but alive, about 6 miles into the backcountry. Without the snowmobile, it would have taken us 3 times as long to reach him. By the time we got him loaded onto the rescue sled and transported back to the waiting ambulance, it was almost 2 in the afternoon. I was exhausted, cold, and hungry when I finally made it back to Mountain View Estates. All I wanted was a hot shower and maybe some leftover pizza. Instead, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Notice of violation, it read in bold letters. The resident of Unit 47B has been found in violation of HOA bylaws regarding recreational vehicle usage and community cooperation. A fine of $500 has been assessed. Additionally, a mandatory hearing has been scheduled for January 15th at 7 p.m. in the community center. Failure to attend will result in additional fines and possible legal action. I crumpled the paper in my fist. January 15th was tomorrow. Inside my townhome, I dropped my gear by the door and immediately called my supervisor at the search and rescue station, Marcus Webb. "Marcus, we've got a problem," I said, explaining the situation with Patricia and the HOA. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "They want you to share your rescue equipment with random neighbors." That's what she said. Something about community resources and HOA bylaws. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Marcus said. "That snowmobile is part of your emergency response kit. It's like asking a firefighter to let people borrow his truck on weekends. Can you write me some kind of letter, official documentation that I need the snowmobile for my job?" "I'll do better than that," Marcus said. "I'll come to the meeting myself." This HOA president needs to understand that what she's demanding could literally cost lives. The next evening, I walked into the community center with Marcus by my side. He wore his official county search and rescue jacket, complete with patches and insignia. The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front where Patricia sat flanked by 2 other board members. About 15 residents filled the chairs facing them, most of whom I recognized from around the complex, but had never spoken to. Patricia looked up as we entered and her expression immediately soured. "Mr. Porter, you're late." I checked my watch. It was 6:58. "The meeting starts at 7. Board members arrive early," she sniffed. "And who is this?" "Marcus Webb, Routt County Search and Rescue," Marcus said, extending his hand. Patricia looked at it like he was offering her a dead fish. "This is an HOA matter, Mr. Webb. We don't require outside interference." "Actually, when HOA matters interfere with emergency services, it becomes my business," Marcus said pleasantly, lowering his hand. "I'm here to provide context about Mr. Porter's professional responsibilities." We took seats in the front row. I noticed a few neighbors whispering and pointing at Marcus's jacket. Good. Maybe they'd understand how ridiculous this whole situation was. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. Where did she even get a gavel? "This emergency session of the Mountain View Estates HOA board is now in session. We're here to address the violations committed by Lucas Porter of Unit 47B. Mr. Porter, you've been accused of monopolizing community recreational equipment, specifically your snowmobile. How do you respond?" I stood up. "It's not recreational equipment. It's essential gear for my job as a search and rescue coordinator. I need immediate access to that snowmobile whenever there's an emergency." "So you've said," Patricia replied. "But I've done my research, Mr. Porter. Search and rescue is a volunteer position in Routt County. You're not even a full-time employee. Therefore, your snowmobile is, by definition, recreational." My jaw dropped. "Are you serious right now?" Marcus stood up beside me. "Madam, volunteer doesn't mean unimportant. Mr. Porter is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When someone is lost or injured in the backcountry, Every minute counts. If he has to wait for someone to return his snowmobile, or if it's been damaged by an untrained operator, someone could die. Patricia's face remained impassive. That sounds like a problem for the county to solve by providing proper equipment to its volunteers. It's not the HOA's responsibility to accommodate Mr. Porter's hobby. It's not a hobby. I was getting angry now, my voice rising. 3 days ago, I used that snowmobile to save a man's life. He would have died from hypothermia if we'd been delayed even another hour. How dramatic, Patricia said. But the fact remains that you signed the HOA bylaws when you purchased your unit. You agreed to abide by our rules. And our rules state that all recreational vehicles must be shared among community members. Then your rules are dangerous and stupid, I shot back. Patricia's eyes flashed. Insults will not help your case, Mr. Porter. In fact, I'm adding another $250 to your fine for disrespecting the board. This is insane. I looked around at the other residents. Does anyone else think this is insane? A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. I recognized the elderly couple from Unit 52. They'd waved at me once or twice. Next to them sat a young family with 2 kids. Behind them was a single guy who I'd seen loading skis into his car every weekend. None of them met my eyes. Going once, going twice, Patricia said with satisfaction. It seems the community agrees with the board's assessment. Now, let's discuss the sharing schedule I've prepared. I'm not agreeing to any schedule, I said firmly. That snowmobile is my property and it's essential equipment for saving lives. You have no right to demand access to it. Patricia leaned forward. Mr. Porter, do you own your townhome? You know I do. And do you recall signing the HOA agreement as part of your closing documents? I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. Yes. Then you agreed to abide by all current and future bylaws established by the board. Let me read you Section 23, Paragraph 6. She adjusted her reading glasses. The HOA board reserves the right to implement new policies as needed to promote community welfare and equality. All residents are bound by these policies regardless of personal circumstances. Marcus shook his head. That's a pretty broad interpretation. I doubt it was meant to cover essential emergency equipment. Your opinion has been noted and dismissed, Patricia said. Now, Mr. Porter, you have 2 options. You can agree to the sharing schedule and pay your current fines, or you can refuse and face escalating penalties, including potential legal action and placing a lien on your property. A lien? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You'd put a lien on my house because I won't let strangers use my snowmobile. We prefer to think of them as neighbors, not strangers, Patricia said. And yes, the HOA has the authority to place liens for unpaid fines and violations. It's all in the bylaws you signed. I looked at Marcus, who looked just as stunned as I felt. This couldn't be legal. It couldn't be right. But I also knew that HOAs had incredible power over homeowners. I'd heard horror stories, but I never thought I'd be living one. I need time to think about this, I said finally. And to consult with a lawyer. Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You have until the end of the week to submit your written agreement to the sharing schedule. If we don't receive it by Friday at 5 p.m., your fines will increase to $1,000 per day and will begin the lien process. This meeting is adjourned. She banged her gavel, and just like that, it was over. The other residents filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact with me. I stood there feeling like I'd just been mugged. This is unbelievable, Marcus said as we walked to our vehicles. I've seen some power-hungry HOAs before, but this takes it to another level. What am I supposed to do? I asked. I can't share that snowmobile. Someone could get hurt. Or worse, I might need it for an actual rescue and it won't be available. Get a lawyer, Marcus said. A good one. This has to violate some kind of law. In the meantime, I'll talk to the county attorney. Maybe there's something we can do from the emergency services angle. I drove home that night feeling defeated. My townhome suddenly felt like a trap rather than a home. I'd bought this place 6 months ago, excited to finally have my own space after years of renting. The location was perfect, close to the search and rescue station and right at the base of the mountains. I'd read through the HOA bylaws before signing, but they'd seemed standard. Nothing about sharing personal property. Nothing about recreational vehicles. That night, I pulled out my copy of the bylaws and read through them carefully. Section 12, subsection 4 did exist. It talked about recreational vehicles and community spaces. But the language was vague, talking about promoting community enjoyment and equitable resource distribution. There was nothing specifically about snowmobiles or mandatory sharing. Then I found Section 23, Paragraph 6, the one Patricia had quoted. It really did give the board broad authority to implement new policies, but surely there were limits. They couldn't just make up any rule they wanted, could they? My phone rang. It was my sister, Teresa. Hey, Lucas, how's it going in the mountains? I filled her in on the situation. Teresa was a paralegal in Denver, and while she didn't specialize in HOA law, she knew her way around legal documents. Send me a copy of your HOA agreement, she said when I finished. And any communications you've had with this Patricia person. This sounds like an overreach of authority to me, but I want to see the actual language. They're threatening to put a lien on my house, Teresa. They can threaten all they want. Actually doing it is another matter. HOAs do have significant power, but they can't just violate your rights to personal property, especially when that property is used for public safety. That's what I thought, but she seemed pretty confident. She's probably used to bullying people into submission. Most homeowners don't fight back because they're scared or they don't know their rights. But you've got a legitimate case here. Send me those documents and I'll see what I can find. I spent the next hour scanning and emailing documents to Teresa. While I waited for her response, I did some research on HOA overreach. The stories I found were horrifying. HOAs fining people for having the wrong color mailbox, demanding that residents remove solar panels, trying to prevent people from parking their own cars in their own driveways. Some of the cases had gone to court, and many had ruled in favor of the homeowners. But the legal battles were expensive and time-consuming. Could I afford to fight this? My search and rescue work was volunteer, like Patricia had correctly pointed out. I made my actual living as a freelance IT consultant, which paid well enough, but I wasn't rich. A prolonged legal battle could drain my savings, but the alternative was unthinkable. I couldn't share my snowmobile with untrained neighbors. Someone would get hurt. And more importantly, I couldn't risk having it unavailable during an emergency. My phone buzzed with a text from Teresa. Call me. Okay, I've read through everything, she said when I called back. Here's the good news. I don't think their sharing policy is enforceable. The bylaws you sign don't specifically mention mandatory sharing of personal property. The section they're citing is about community amenities like swimming pools or clubhouses, not individual possessions. That's what I thought it meant too, but Patricia seemed sure she could enforce it. She's interpreting the bylaws in the broadest possible way, probably hoping you won't fight back. The section about the board having authority to implement new policies doesn't give them unlimited power. Courts generally hold that new policies have to be reasonable and related to legitimate HOA interests. So, what do? Write a formal response refusing their demand. Cite the fact that your snowmobile is essential equipment for emergency services and that sharing it would compromise public safety. Make it professional and factual. No insults, no emotions. Just lay out why their policy is unreasonable and unenforceable. And if they don't back down, then you might need to lawyer up. But let's try the reasonable approach first. Sometimes these petty tyrants back down when someone actually stands up to them. I worked on the letter that night, revising it multiple times to get the tone right. Professional but firm. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. I printed it out, signed it, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to the HOA board. The next morning, I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, which was really just a small room in the community center. Patricia was there, sitting behind a desk that seemed too large for the space. "Mr. Porter," she said coldly, "have you come to submit your agreement to the sharing schedule?" "I've come to submit my formal response to your demands," I said, placing the envelope on her desk. "I will not be agreeing to any sharing schedule. My snowmobile is essential equipment for my work with search and rescue, and sharing it would compromise public safety." Patricia opened the envelope and read through my letter, her expression growing darker with each paragraph. "This is very disappointing, Mr. Porter," she said finally. "I had hoped you would see reason." "I am seeing reason. You're the one demanding something unreasonable and dangerous. The board will review your response at our next meeting," she said stiffly. "In the meantime, your fines continue to accumulate. You're now up to $1,500. For what? I haven't violated any legitimate rule. For violating the community sharing policy and for contempt of the board." Contempt of the board. That's not even a thing. Patricia's smile was cold. "It is now. I've implemented it as an emergency policy under Section 23, Paragraph 6. Any resident who refuses to cooperate with board directives can be fined for contempt. It's $500 per instance." I felt my hands clenching into fists. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "You're making up rules specifically to punish me. I'm enforcing the authority granted to me by the bylaws that you signed. Now, unless you have something productive to add, I suggest you leave. I have work to do." I left before I said something I'd regret. Outside, the morning air was crisp and cold, but I barely felt it. My whole body was hot with anger. My radio crackled. "Porter, you available? We've got a situation at Strawberry Park." "I'm available," I said, grateful for the distraction. "What's going on?" "Snowmobiler went through the ice on a shallow creek. Possible leg injury. Can you assist?" "On my way." I jogged back to my townhome, fired up my snowmobile, and headed out. This was exactly why I needed immediate access to my equipment. Emergencies didn't wait for convenient times or HOA schedules. The rescue took most of the day. The snowmobiler, a tourist from Oklahoma, had been riding too fast and hadn't seen the creek bed until it was too late. His leg was broken in 2 places, and we had to stabilize him before we could transport him. Without my snowmobile, we would have had to carry him out on foot for over a mile. With it, we had him to the ambulance in 30 minutes. It was almost dark when I got home. Another notice was taped to my door. "Your fines have been escalated. Total amount due, $3,000. You have 48 hours to pay or agree to the sharing schedule. $3,000 in 3 days for refusing to let strangers use my emergency equipment." I called Teresa again. "They're escalating. $3,000 now." "Okay, that's definitely harassment. I think it's time to get a real lawyer involved. I have a friend who practices in Colorado Springs. She's dealt with HOA cases before. Her name is Jennifer Martinez. I'll send you her contact info." Jennifer Martinez returned my call within an hour. I explained the situation, and she listened without interrupting. "This is one of the more egregious cases I've heard," she said when I finished, "but unfortunately not that unusual. HOAs have enormous power, and some board members let it go to their heads. The good news is I think we have a strong case. The bad news is these things take time. How much time? Could be months, maybe longer if they really want to fight. In the meantime, I'd recommend we file for an emergency injunction to stop the fines while we sort this out. That'll cost you, though. My retainer is $5,000 and court fees will be additional, $5,000, plus the $3,000 in fines they were demanding, plus whatever other costs came up. This was spiraling out of control. Let me think about it, I said. Don't think too long. The longer you wait, the more ammunition they have. If they do file a lien, it becomes much more complicated to fight. After we hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the wall. I'd saved up a decent amount of money, but this could wipe out my emergency fund. And for what? Because some power-hungry HOA president had decided to target me. My phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. "Hey, I talked to the county attorney like I promised. She's interested in this case. Really interested. Apparently, there's been some talk about regulating HOAs more strictly in Colorado, and this could be a good test case." A test case? That sounds like it could drag on forever. Maybe. But here's the thing. If the county gets involved, it sends a message that this isn't just a civil dispute. It's a matter of public safety. The county attorney is willing to send a cease and desist letter to your HOA, demanding they stop interfering with your ability to respond to emergencies. Will that work? It might. Or it might make them dig in harder, but it doesn't cost you anything and it shows you've got official backing. Do it, I said. At this point, I'll try anything. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined worst-case scenarios. Losing my townhome, going bankrupt from legal fees, having to move back to Denver with my tail between my legs, and underneath it all was a simmering rage at Patricia and her petty dictatorship. The next morning, my radio went off again. "Porter, we need you at Storm Peak. Possible avalanche. 2 skiers missing." I grabbed my gear and ran outside, but when I got to where I'd parked my snowmobile, it was gone. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed the tire marks in the snow, leading away from my parking spot toward the community storage area. I ran after the tracks, my heart pounding. The storage area was a large garage where residents could keep bikes, kayaks, and other recreational equipment. The door was open, and inside I found my snowmobile parked between a kayak and a mountain bike. A large sign hung from the handlebars. "Community property. Sign up for usage times at the HOA office." White-hot rage flooded through me. They'd taken my snowmobile. While I slept, someone had hot-wired or somehow started my machine and moved it. And now 2 people were missing on the mountain while my emergency equipment was locked up like a toy. I grabbed the snowmobile and wheeled it toward the exit, but the garage door suddenly started closing. I looked up and saw Patricia standing outside with a remote control in her hand. "Step away from the vehicle, Mr. Porter," she called. "That's community property now. You haven't signed up for a usage time." "There are people missing on Storm Peak," I shouted. "I need this snowmobile for search and rescue." "Then you should have thought about that before you refused to cooperate. The snowmobile is available for reservation. You can book it for tomorrow afternoon." "They could be dead by tomorrow afternoon," Patricia shrugged. "That's unfortunate. But rules are rules." I was done being reasonable. I hopped on the snowmobile and started the engine. Patricia's eyes widened. "If you remove that vehicle without authorization, I'll call the police." "That's theft. Call them," I shouted back. Tell them you're interfering with an emergency response. I gunned the engine and shot out of the storage area before the garage door could close completely. Behind me, I could hear Patricia screaming into her phone. The rescue at Storm Peak was complicated and dangerous. The avalanche had been small but destructive, and we found both skiers partially buried. One had a head injury. The other was unconscious from hypothermia. We got them out, but it was close. Another hour and we would have been recovering bodies instead of saving lives. By the time I got back to Mountain View Estates, there were 2 police cars in the parking lot. My heart sank. A young officer approached me as I parked the snowmobile. "Are you Lucas Porter?" "That's me. We've had a complaint that you stole community property." "It's not community property. It's my snowmobile. I bought it with my own money. The HOA president had it moved without my permission while I was sleeping." The officer looked skeptical. "Madam says it's designated as community equipment per HOA rules." The HOA president is lying, or delusional, or both. I was exhausted and filthy and in no mood for this. "Look, I'm a search and rescue coordinator. I just used this machine to save 2 people's lives at Storm Peak. You can call Marcus Webb at County Search and Rescue if you don't believe me." The officer's expression changed slightly. "Search and rescue, yes. That's why I need immediate access to this equipment. People die when there are delays. Hold on." The officer walked back to his car and spoke into his radio. After a few minutes, he returned with his partner, an older woman with sergeant stripes. "Mr. Porter, I just spoke with your supervisor. He confirms your story about the rescue. He also mentioned there's been some kind of dispute with your HOA." "That's putting it mildly," I said. I explained the whole situation from the beginning, about Patricia's demands for shared usage, the escalating fines, and finally the theft of my snowmobile while I slept. The sergeant listened carefully. "So the HOA president moved your personal property without your permission?" "Yes." "And you're saying this snowmobile is essential equipment for your volunteer work?" "Absolutely. Without it, I can't respond effectively to backcountry emergencies." The sergeant nodded. "Okay, here's how this is going to work. This is a civil matter between you and your HOA. We can't force them to leave your property alone, and we can't force you to share it. You'll need to work that out through lawyers or the courts." My heart sank. "However," she continued, "moving your vehicle without your permission could be considered theft or at least criminal trespass. I'm going to have a conversation with Miss Henderson about that. In the meantime, I'd recommend you keep your snowmobile secured so no one can move it again." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. The sergeant walked toward the HOA office, and I wheeled my snowmobile back to my parking spot. This time, I locked it with a heavy chain and padlock. Let Patricia try to move it now. I was barely inside my townhome when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find my neighbor from Unit 49, a middle-aged woman named Susan. "I just wanted to say I think what Patricia is doing is wrong," she said quietly, glancing around like she was afraid of being overheard. "A lot of us think so, but nobody wants to speak up because she'll target them next." "Then help me fight this," I said. "Come to the next board meeting. Tell them this policy is ridiculous." Susan shook her head. "I can't, I'm sorry. I have kids and we can't afford to get hit with fines like she's hitting you, but I wanted you to know you're not alone." She hurried away before I could respond. It was something, I supposed. At least some of the residents recognized how crazy this was, even if they were too scared to do anything about it. Over the next few days, things escalated further. Patricia sent daily notices about my mounting fines, which had now reached $7,000. She also distributed a newsletter to all residents explaining that I was a selfish community member who refused to share resources and was putting my personal interests above the welfare of the neighborhood. The newsletter was full of lies and distortions. It claimed I used my snowmobile for weekend joyrides, and that my search and rescue work was an occasional hobby. It suggested that I was dangerous and unstable, pointing to my aggressive confrontation with her when I'd stolen the snowmobile from community storage. I was furious. This was libel, clear and simple. I called Jennifer Martinez, the lawyer Teresa had recommended. "Okay, this changes things," Jennifer said after I read her the newsletter. "Making false statements about you in writing distributed to your neighbors is defamation. That gives us additional grounds to sue. I think it's time to go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" "I mean we stop playing defense and we hit back. We file suit against the HOA and Patricia Henderson, personally for harassment, defamation, and interference with your ability to perform essential public safety duties. We also file for an emergency restraining order preventing them from interfering with your snowmobile or levying any additional fines." "How much will that cost?" "With my retainer and court fees, you're looking at around $8,000 to start, maybe more if they fight hard." "But Lucas, I think you'll win. And when you do, you can sue for damages and attorney fees. You might even come out ahead." $8,000. It was most of my emergency fund. But what choice did I have? "Do it," I said. Jennifer moved fast. Within 3 days, we'd filed our lawsuit and the request for a restraining order. The HOA and Patricia were served with papers at the next board meeting, which I heard about from Susan, who texted me secretly. Patricia went ballistic, screaming about ungrateful residents and legal attacks. She says she's going to fight this to the end and make an example of you. Great, just great. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Jennifer advised me to document everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every notice, every fine. I started carrying my phone everywhere, ready to record at a moment's notice. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days before the hearing, Patricia showed up at my door with a locksmith. "Mr. Porter, open up," she shouted, pounding on the door. I grabbed my phone and started recording before I answered. "What do you want, Patricia?" "The HOA board has voted to confiscate your snowmobile due to your refusal to comply with community standards. This locksmith is here to remove your security chain. You're not touching my property." "It's not your property anymore. The board has voted to claim it under eminent domain for community use." I almost laughed. Eminent domain? That's for government seizure of property for public use. An HOA isn't the government. We're the governing body of this community, which gives us similar powers. "No, it doesn't. You're a private organization. You have no authority to seize my property." Patricia's face was red now. "If you don't surrender the snowmobile voluntarily, we'll have it towed. And I'll add another $5,000 to your fines for obstruction." "Go ahead and try," I said. "But I'm recording this conversation, and you're digging yourself deeper into a lawsuit. You can't record me without my permission. Actually, Colorado is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of, and I'm keeping every bit of this for my lawyer." Patricia sputtered, then turned to the locksmith. "Cut that chain, now." The locksmith, a tired-looking man in his 50s, held up his hands. "Look, lady, I'm not getting involved in whatever this is. You want a chain cut, call a bolt cutter company. I'm out." He walked away, leaving Patricia standing there shaking with rage. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. "The board is meeting tomorrow night, and we're going to vote to revoke your ownership of Unit 47B. We'll have you evicted." "You can't evict someone from a home they own." "We can for violation of community standards. It's in the bylaws." She stormed off, and I immediately called Jennifer. She just threatened to revoke my ownership of my townhome, I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to stay calm. Yeah, she can't do that. That's not how property law works. But it shows she's getting desperate, which is good for us. Send me that recording right away. This is going to look great in front of the judge. The next few days felt like waiting for a bomb to drop. I kept expecting Patricia to show up with a wrecking crew or a SWAT team or something equally insane. Instead, things went quiet. Too quiet. Susan texted me the morning of the restraining order hearing. Be careful. Patricia had a private meeting with her lawyer yesterday. She looked very pleased with herself afterward. That didn't sound good. The hearing was held at the Routt County Courthouse, a modest building in downtown Steamboat Springs. Jennifer met me outside, carrying a thick briefcase full of documents. Ready, she asked, as I'll ever be. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Judge Margaret Riley, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, presided from the bench. Patricia sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Richard Chambers. Jennifer presented our case first, laying out the timeline of events and Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior. She submitted my recording of the snowmobile confiscation attempt, the defamatory newsletter, and testimonies from Marcus Webb and several other search and rescue volunteers about the importance of my equipment. Judge Riley listened carefully, taking notes. When Jennifer finished, she turned to Richard Chambers. Mr. Chambers, I'd like to hear the HOA's position on this. Chambers stood smoothly. Your Honor, this case is simply about a resident who refuses to follow community rules. Mr. Porter purchased his home knowing he'd be bound by HOA bylaws. Those bylaws give the board authority to implement policies for the good of the community. The sharing policy for recreational equipment is reasonable and applies to all residents equally. Mr. Porter's snowmobile isn't recreational equipment, Jennifer interjected. It's essential emergency response gear. That's Mr. Porter's claim, Chambers said, but the fact is his search and rescue work is voluntary and part-time. The snowmobile is used for recreational purposes on his days off. The HOA isn't preventing him from owning the machine, merely requiring that he share access with other community members during times when he's not actively using it for emergencies. Judge Riley frowned. How would that work in practice? Emergency calls can come at any time. The HOA has proposed a simple callback system. If Mr. Porter receives an emergency call while another resident is using the snowmobile, they would return it immediately. It's a reasonable compromise that respects both community interests and public safety. I wanted to jump up and scream. A callback system. What if the person using the snowmobile was 10 miles away on a mountain trail? What if they damaged it? What if they simply refused to return it quickly enough? Jennifer was already on her feet. Your Honor, that proposal is completely unrealistic. When someone is missing or injured in the backcountry, minutes matter. Mr. Porter needs immediate access to his equipment. A delay of even 30 minutes could be the difference between life and death. The HOA believes Mr. Porter is exaggerating the urgency of his volunteer work to avoid his community obligations, Chambers said smoothly. Judge Riley held up her hand. I've heard enough for now. I'm going to take a short recess to review the documents. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Jennifer and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, not speaking. I could see Patricia and Chambers through the window, looking confident and relaxed. That worried me. Finally, we were called back in. Judge Riley looked serious. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, she said. This is a complex case involving the intersection of property rights, HOA authority, and public safety concerns. However, at this preliminary stage, I'm focused on whether immediate relief is warranted. My heart was pounding. Mr. Porter has demonstrated that his snowmobile is essential equipment for his volunteer work with search and rescue. The evidence shows he's used it multiple times for legitimate emergency responses, including several life-saving rescues. While HOAs do have broad authority to regulate community affairs, that authority is not unlimited. Patricia's face was turning red. The attempt to confiscate Mr. Porter's snowmobile, as documented in his recording, appears to exceed the HOA's legitimate authority. Additionally, the defamatory statements in the community newsletter are concerning and may form the basis for a separate claim. Yes, come on. Therefore, I'm granting a temporary restraining order preventing the Mountain View Estates HOA from interfering with Mr. Porter's use and possession of his snowmobile. The HOA is also barred from levying any additional fines related to this matter until the underlying case is resolved. Existing fines are stayed pending the outcome of the lawsuit. Relief flooded through me. Jennifer squeezed my arm, smiling, but Judge Riley wasn't done. However, I want to be clear that this restraining order is temporary. The question of whether the HOA's sharing policy is enforceable will be determined at trial. I encourage both parties to consider mediation to resolve this matter without further legal expense. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. The court is overstepping its bounds and interfering with the HOA's legitimate authority. Judge Riley's expression hardened. Miss Henderson, I've made my ruling. If you have concerns about it, you can file an appeal through the proper channels. But I suggest you carefully consider whether you want to continue down this path. This court takes public safety very seriously, and interference with emergency services is a grave matter. Patricia looked like she wanted to say more, but Chambers put a hand on her arm and whispered something. She sat down, shaking with anger. As we left the courthouse, Jennifer was beaming. That went better than I hoped. Judge Riley clearly sees through their nonsense. But she said the sharing policy question will be decided at trial. Does that mean this isn't over? The restraining order buys us time and sends a message. But yes, we'll need to go to trial to settle this permanently. The good news is, I think we're in a strong position. The bad news is, trials are expensive and time-consuming. How expensive? Could be $20,000 or more if it drags out. But like I said before, when we win, we can sue for attorney fees and damages. Patricia's behavior has been so egregious that I think we can make a case for punitive damages too. $20,000. I felt sick. Even if I won it all back eventually, I'd have to spend it first. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been excited to buy my first home. I'd thought joining an HOA would be a minor inconvenience at worst. Now I was in the middle of a legal battle that could cost me everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard about the restraining order. Great news. But we've got a problem. I called him immediately. What kind of problem? Patricia Henderson contacted the county commissioners. She's claiming that volunteer search and rescue members are a liability risk and demanding stricter regulations. She specifically mentioned you, saying you're reckless and use your position to justify breaking community rules. She's trying to get me kicked out of search and rescue. That's what it looks like. The commissioners are taking her complaint seriously. There's going to be a hearing next month. I sat up in bed, my mind racing. Patricia wasn't just fighting me on the HOA front. She was attacking my volunteer work, trying to destroy my ability to do the job I loved. Can she really do that? The commissioners have authority over county volunteer programs. If she convinces them that you're a problem, they could remove you from the roster. It would be hard to fight. This is insane. She's vindictive and petty, and she's using her HOA position to wage a personal war against me. I know, and we're going to fight it, but I wanted you to be aware. This woman isn't going to stop until she's destroyed you or destroyed herself trying. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness, feeling overwhelmed. I'd done nothing wrong. All I wanted was to keep my equipment accessible so I could save lives. But Patricia had turned it into a crusade. The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. I couldn't fight Patricia on every front simultaneously. I needed allies. Real allies, not just Susan sending secret texts of support. I started by reaching out to other residents directly. I printed flyers explaining my situation from my perspective, carefully avoiding anything that could be considered defamatory. I focused on facts, my work with search and rescue, the importance of immediate equipment access, and Patricia's escalating demands and threats. I slipped the flyers under doors early one morning before Patricia could stop me. Within hours, my phone started ringing. The first call was from a guy named Brian who lived in Unit 61. Man, I had no idea this was going on. Patricia's newsletter made it sound like you were some kind of troublemaker who was refusing to help the community. That's what she wanted everyone to think. Well, it's messed up. I'm a firefighter. If someone told me I had to share my gear with neighbors, I'd laugh in their face. What you're dealing with is no different. Would you be willing to speak up at the next board meeting? Absolutely. This has gone too far. More calls followed. A retired lawyer named George from Unit 55. A young teacher named Amanda from Unit 43. Even the elderly couple I'd seen at the first board meeting, Harold and Mary from Unit 52. They were all upset about Patricia's tactics, and they were ready to do something about it. By the end of the week, I had a group of 15 residents who agreed to attend the next board meeting and demand changes. Some wanted Patricia removed as president. Others wanted the sharing policy repealed. All of them were tired of living under what George called HOA tyranny. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks after the restraining order hearing. Patricia tried to cancel it, claiming security concerns, but George pointed out that bylaws required regular monthly meetings. She couldn't cancel without violating the HOA's own rules. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Every chair was filled and people stood along the walls. I'd never seen so many residents in one place. Patricia sat at the front table with the other 2 board members, looking nervous for the first time since this whole mess started. George stood up first. Madam President, I'm here tonight to address the ongoing situation with Mr. Lucas Porter and the sharing policy you've implemented. This matter has already been addressed, Patricia said curtly. Mr. Porter's refusal to cooperate is well documented. Actually, what's well documented is your harassment of a volunteer search and rescue coordinator and your attempts to confiscate his personal property. George's voice was firm and clear. I've practiced law for 35 years, and I've reviewed this case thoroughly. What you're doing is illegal, unethical, and dangerous. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed. The board has authority to implement policies for the good of the community. Your authority is limited by law and common sense, George continued. You cannot seize personal property. You cannot levy arbitrary fines without legitimate basis. And you certainly cannot interfere with emergency services. What you're doing isn't community leadership. It's abuse of power. Brian stood up next. I'm a firefighter. If someone tried to make me share my equipment with untrained civilians, they'd be laughed out of the room. Lucas needs immediate access to his snowmobile to save lives. This sharing policy isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Amanda spoke next, then Harold, then several others. One by one, residents stood up and called for Patricia to rescind the sharing policy and resign as president. The mood in the room shifted from tense to angry. Finally, Patricia banged her gavel. "This meeting is out of order. I will not be bullied by a mob." "It's not a mob," George said calmly. "It's your community exercising their right to be heard, and we're calling for a vote of no confidence in your leadership." Patricia's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "Actually, we can. Section 18 of the bylaws allows for a special election if 20% of homeowners petition for one. I've been gathering signatures this week, and we've exceeded that threshold." George held up a thick stack of papers. "I'm formally requesting a special election to recall you as president and to repeal the sharing policy." The room erupted in applause. Patricia looked stunned. The other two board members, who'd been silent throughout this whole ordeal, were whispering to each other urgently. One of them, a quiet woman named Linda, finally spoke up. "Madam President, I think we need to consider this petition seriously. The community is clearly unhappy with the current direction." "We will do no such thing," Patricia snapped. "These people are being manipulated by Mr. Porter. They don't understand the full situation." "I think we understand just fine," Brian called out. "You've gone on a power trip, and it's time to stop." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Patricia tried to adjourn, but George kept pointing out procedural rules she was violating. The other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, Linda made a motion to accept the petition and schedule a special election. The third board member, a man named Tom who'd never said a word in any meeting I'd attended, seconded it. Patricia's face went through several shades of red and purple. "This is a coup. You're all conspiring against me. It's called democracy," George said. The vote, Linda and Tom voted yes. Patricia voted no. The motion passed. The special election was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the board voted to suspend all fines against me and to cease enforcement of the sharing policy pending the outcome. I couldn't believe it. After weeks of fighting, things were finally turning around, but Patricia wasn't done yet. 2 days after the board meeting, I woke up to find my snowmobile vandalized. Someone had poured sugar in the gas tank, slashed the seat, and spray-painted "selfish prick" across the side. I called the police immediately. The same sergeant who'd responded before came out to investigate. "Any idea who did this?" she asked, taking photos of the damage. "I have suspicions, but no proof." "Let me guess. Your HOA president, she's the one with the biggest grudge against me," the sergeant nodded. "I'll file a report. You should also get security cameras if you don't have them already. If this happens again, we'll want video evidence." I spent that day cleaning up the damage and getting the snowmobile repaired. The sugar in the gas tank was the worst part. I had to drain and flush the entire fuel system. It cost me $800 and took most of the day. I installed security cameras that evening, mounting them to capture every angle of my parking spot. If Patricia or anyone else came after my equipment again, I'd have proof. 3 days later, the cameras caught someone, Patricia herself, approaching my snowmobile at 2 in the morning with what looked like a hammer. But before she could do anything, my phone alerted me to the motion. I ran outside in my pajamas and she fled. I had her on video, clear as day. I sent the footage to the police and to Jennifer. "This is perfect," Jennifer said when she called me back. "Attempted vandalism, trespassing, and given that she'd already vandalized it once, we can establish a pattern. I'm filing for a personal restraining order against her on your behalf." The restraining order was granted within 48 hours. Patricia was ordered to stay at least 100 feet away from me and my property at all times. Violation would result in arrest. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Susan texted me urgently one afternoon. "Patricia is going door to door telling people that you filed a false police report and that the restraining order is retaliation for her doing her job as president. She's trying to turn the community against you before the election." I felt tired. So tired. Would this woman never stop? But George and the others rallied around me. They organized a meeting at Brian's unit where they showed residents the security footage of Patricia attempting to vandalize my snowmobile. They explained the whole timeline of events, from the initial sharing demand to the attempted confiscation to the vandalism. By the time of the special election, community opinion had shifted decisively against Patricia. The vote wasn't even close. She was removed as president by a margin of 72-11. Linda was elected as the new president, and one of the first actions of the new board was to formally repeal the sharing policy and issue a written apology to me. I thought it was finally over. The lawsuit was still pending, but Jennifer assured me we could probably settle it now that Patricia was no longer in power. The new board had no interest in continuing her crusade. But then came the hearing with the county commissioners about my position in search and rescue. Patricia showed up with a prepared statement and a folder full of documents. She claimed I was reckless, that I'd endangered community members by aggressively removing my snowmobile from the storage area, and that I'd threatened her personally. Marcus and several other search and rescue volunteers testified on my behalf, explaining that I was one of their most reliable and skilled coordinators. They submitted records of my rescues, including statements from people whose lives I'd saved. Jennifer attended as well, presenting the security footage of Patricia's attempted vandalism and the judge's restraining order. She made it clear that Patricia's complaints were motivated by personal vendetta rather than legitimate concern. The commissioners deliberated for less than 20 minutes. When they returned, the chairman addressed Patricia directly. "Miss Henderson, it's clear from the evidence that your complaints against Mr. Porter are frivolous and retaliatory. This commission will not be used as a weapon in your personal disputes. Mr. Porter's record with search and rescue is exemplary, and he will continue in his position without restriction." Then he turned to Patricia with a stern expression. "Furthermore, I want to warn you that filing false complaints with county agencies is a serious matter. If you continue this pattern of behavior, we may refer the matter to the district attorney for possible prosecution." Patricia left the hearing room without a word, her face pale. A week later, Jennifer called with news. "The HOA has agreed to settle. They're dropping all fines, they're paying your legal fees in full, and they're paying you $25,000 in damages for the harassment and defamation." $25,000. Patricia's behavior was so egregious that they don't want to risk going to trial. Their insurance company is pushing for settlement because they're afraid a jury would award even more. "You should take it, Lucas. It's a good outcome." I agreed. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. With the legal fees covered and $25,000 in my account, I actually came out ahead financially. More importantly, the ordeal was over, but there was one more development. 2 months after everything settled, Susan knocked on my door. "Have you heard about Patricia?" "No, what happened?" "She's been arrested." Apparently, she was doing the same thing at her previous HOA before she moved here. Harassing residents, levying fake fines, even embezzling HOA funds. Someone saw the news coverage of your case and contacted the police in her old neighborhood. They investigated and filed charges. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Patricia had let power corrupt her so completely that she'd ruined her own life. The trial was held that summer. I attended one day of testimony, curious to see how it would end. Patricia was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and harassment. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She'd stolen over $50,000 from her previous HOA, using fake invoices and inflated maintenance costs to cover her tracks. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution. As I sat in the courtroom watching her being led away, I thought about how this whole nightmare had started with her demanding I share my snowmobile. Such a small, petty thing. But it had revealed something much darker underneath. A person who craved control and was willing to destroy anyone who challenged her. Life returned to normal after that. Linda proved to be a reasonable and effective HOA president. The new board focused on actual community issues like snow removal and landscape maintenance, not made-up controversies. My relationship with my neighbors improved dramatically. Brian and I became good friends, often grabbing beers after our respective shifts. I continued my work with search and rescue, responding to emergencies throughout Routt County. My snowmobile remained exactly where it belonged, in my parking spot, always fueled and ready, available the moment someone needed help in the backcountry. One morning the following winter, I was loading gear onto my snowmobile when Linda approached me. "Heading out on a rescue?" she asked. "Training exercise up at Buffalo Pass. Got to stay sharp." She nodded. "I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Patricia. I know it cost you a lot of stress and money, even though you got it back eventually. But you did the whole community a service. She would have kept getting worse if someone hadn't stopped her." "I didn't have much choice," I said. "She attacked something that mattered to me. Something that saves lives. Still, a lot of people would have just given up and moved away. You fought back and you won. That takes courage." As Linda walked away, I thought about her words. It had taken courage, but more than that, it had taken stubbornness. I'd refused to let Patricia's petty tyranny control my life. I'd refused to compromise on something I knew was right. I started the snowmobile and headed toward the mountains. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow, and the air was crisp and clean. This was why I lived here. Not just for the beauty, but for the purpose. For the knowledge that when someone was lost or hurt in these mountains, I could help. My radio crackled. "Porter, you copy? Go ahead. We've got a possible situation developing near Hans Peak. Snowboarder overdue from yesterday. Family just reported it. On my way." I gunned the engine and headed north, my snowmobile responding instantly. This was what it was built for, what I was built for. Not sitting idle in a garage while untrained neighbors took it for joyrides, not being shared according to some arbitrary schedule. But ready, always ready to go when someone needed help. The rescue took most of the day. The snowboarder had gotten disoriented in a whiteout and spent the night in a snow cave. He was hypothermic and dehydrated but alive. We got him out safely, another life saved. As I drove back to Mountain View Estates that evening, exhausted but satisfied, I realized that Patricia had actually done me a favor in a twisted way. Her attacks had forced me to stand up for myself. They'd brought the community together. They'd exposed her corruption and prevented her from victimizing more people. And most importantly, they'd reminded me why I did this work. Not for recognition or reward, but because it mattered. Because when someone was lost in the wilderness, scared and alone, they needed help. And I had the skills, the equipment, and the determination to provide it. I parked my snowmobile in its usual spot and locked it up for the night. Tomorrow might bring another emergency, or it might be quiet. Either way, I'd be ready. That's what being part of search and rescue meant. That's what being a responsible community member meant. Not following arbitrary rules imposed by petty tyrants, but being there when it counted. Being reliable. Being prepared. As I walked into my townhome, I felt genuinely grateful for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Grateful for neighbors like George and Brian and Susan, who'd stood up when it mattered. Grateful for professionals like Jennifer and Marcus, who'd fought on my behalf. Grateful for a judge who'd seen through Patricia's nonsense, and a community that had ultimately rejected her toxic leadership. And grateful that I still had my snowmobile, ready and waiting in its parking spot, exactly where it belonged. The next morning, I woke to my radio calling me to another rescue. A cross-country skier had broken her leg near Rabbit Ears Pass. I was dressed and on my snowmobile within 5 minutes, racing towards someone who needed help. This was my life. This was my purpose. And no HOA president, no matter how determined or vindictive, was ever going to take that away from me. As I crested a ridge and saw the rescue site ahead, I thought about how far things had come since that first morning when Patricia had confronted me. I'd nearly lost everything fighting her. My savings, my home, my position with search and rescue. But I'd stood my ground and I'd won. More importantly, the community had won. They'd taken back control from someone who'd abused her power. They'd learned that standing together was more powerful than staying silent out of fear. And they'd established that HOA authority had limits, that it couldn't override basic rights or common sense or public safety. The skier was right where dispatch said she'd be, huddled under a tree with her friend trying to keep her warm. I pulled up beside them and started unpacking my medical gear. "Help is here," I called out. "You're going to be okay." And she was, because I'd been able to respond immediately, because my equipment was ready, because no one was borrowing my snowmobile for a recreational trip, because I'd fought for what was right and won. That evening, back at the search and rescue station, Marcus pulled me aside. "Good work today. That skier would have been in serious trouble if we'd been delayed. Just doing my job. It's more than a job, and you know it." Speaking of which, I've been meaning to tell you. The county is creating a full-time search and rescue coordinator position. Paid, benefits, the works. I'd like you to apply. I stared at him. Really, really. Your experience over the past year, including how you handled the HOA situation, showed that you've got the dedication and toughness for this work. What do you say? I didn't have to think about it. Yes, absolutely yes. 3 months later, I started my new position as full-time search and rescue coordinator for Routt County. The job came with a salary, health insurance, and even a budget for equipment maintenance. My snowmobile expenses were now tax-deductible as legitimate business costs. I stayed in my townhome at Mountain View Estates. Linda and the new board continued to run things smoothly. There were no more demands for sharing personal property, no more arbitrary fines, no more harassment. Just a normal, functional community. Sometimes I'd see Susan or George or Brian around the complex, and we'd chat about nothing in particular. Normal neighbor stuff. They never brought up Patricia or the lawsuit, and neither did I. That chapter was closed, but I never forgot the lessons I'd learned. About standing up to bullies, even when they have institutional power behind them. About the importance of community support in fighting injustice. About knowing your rights and being willing to defend them. And I never took for granted the freedom to do my job without interference. Every time I fired up my snowmobile and headed into the mountains to help someone, I felt grateful. Grateful for the equipment, grateful for the training, grateful for the opportunity to make a difference. 1 year after the settlement, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the family of the first skier I'd rescued after Patricia demanded I share my snowmobile, the young man from Texas who'd been stuck in a tree well. "Dear Mr. Porter," it read, "I wanted to reach out and thank you for saving my son's life last winter. We recently read about the difficulties you faced with your HOA, and were amazed to learn that you rescued Tyler the same day your HOA president tried to confiscate your snowmobile. If you'd been delayed even slightly, the doctors said Tyler would have died from hypothermia. We're forever grateful that you fought to keep your equipment accessible. You're a hero, and we'll never forget what you did for our family." I put the letter on my refrigerator where I could see it every day. It reminded me why the fight had been worth it. Not for the settlement money or the vindication or even the full-time job, but for moments like that, for lives saved, for families reunited, for making a difference when it mattered most. Patricia was in prison. The corrupt HOA leadership had been swept away. My career was thriving. And most importantly, I was still doing the work I loved, helping people who needed it, making the mountains a little bit safer for everyone who ventured into them. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. And my snowmobile remained right where it belonged, in my parking spot, fueled and ready, waiting for the next call. Always ready, always available, never to be shared because some things are too important to compromise on. That's how my story ended. Not with dramatic courthouse victories or tearful reconciliations, but with quiet satisfaction. With the knowledge that I'd stood up for what was right, paid the price, and come out stronger on the other side. And every time I heard my radio crackle with a new emergency, every time I raced into the mountains to help someone in trouble, I knew I'd made the right choice. Some battles are worth fighting. Some principles are worth defending. And some equipment is too essential to ever share, no matter what any HOA president demands.